Good evening, y'all. My name is Cale Carter, and today we're going to continue our historical examination of the 364th Infantry Regiment. Now, in the previous video, I made mention of how the 364th Infantry came about and ultimately what it did during its entire war service. Also, during that video, I made mention of some critical events that became ingrained in the legacy of the 364th Infantry Regiment. And today I'm going to focus on one of those events, and this event is better known as the Phoenix Massacre. Now, in the original video, in the first video, I made mention of some of the key features that led to the Phoenix Massacre. And just to review, those were lack of proper training facilities, lack of actual permanent facilities for the soldiers to stay in, as well at their posts. There was also a high turnover of officers according to the records, as well as incidences of racism occurring both on and off post. So while this was going on, the U.S. Army, and more in particular the War Department, didn't really get word of what was going on with the 364th until October 1942. And in October 1942, one of the chaplains in the 364th, Lieutenant Thornhill, he wrote a letter to the Chief of Chaplains documenting those issues that I mentioned before that was occurring on the post, and in essence undermining the morale of the 364th. Also in the letter, he also singles out the 364th executive officer, Lieutenant Colonel Hugh Adair, and he singles him out specifically because, according to the letter, he had some violent and racist interactions with the soldiers, and because of that, that was undermining morale. Now, the word of the letter kind of makes its way about both in the War Department and even in some elements of Congress. And in fact, Senator Jay Guffey, he urged the U.S. Army to investigate these issues that were occurring. And the reason why he urged it, because he's, in his own words, is that, well, if these issues are not addressed, this is going to lead to a riot. And keep in mind, during this time, there was still a lot of tension that shows up during both this year in 1942, as well as in 1943, involving clashes between black soldiers, white officers, and particularly in the South and other areas, white populaces and black soldiers. So he urged the U.S. Army to investigate this, so that way there wouldn't be any, that basically if there was any chance of a riot, it can be addressed before it happens. Now, the U.S. Army did agree that, hey, we need to address some of these issues, but most of the army wanted to focus on the leadership aspect, saying, well, based off that, there's a poor leadership issue. So, yes, we should get rid of the executive officer, but we may have to get rid of the commanding officer as well. So, one of the two major leaders that lead up to the Phoenix Massacre is two things. The first one is an incident that occurs in early November 1942. Now, according to the records really don't specify what triggered this event, but whatever occurred in the stockades, it resulted in the soldiers that were in the 364th that was in the stockades to literally leave their cells and get on the roof of the stockade and basically raise a ruckus. They start hooting and hollering and everything, and the thing is, when they're doing that, they're causing a scene which leads to a crowd of other soldiers kind of forming around them to see what the heck is going on. The commanding officer hears about this, goes down there, and urges the men that are in the stockade, hey, stop acting up, go back in your cells. They refuse. So then he turns to the soldiers that are forming the crowd. Hey, y'all need to disperse. They too refuse. So ultimately, as time goes on, the soldiers both in the stockade return to the cells, and the soldiers in the crowd do disperse. But within the Army, and especially within the Army's leadership, they're like, wait a minute, like, you told the soldier to disperse and they refused? And the commanding officer, he viewed it like, well, they did disperse. They might not have dispersed when I told them to initially, but they ultimately dispersed. So he felt that yeah, it's just basically it kind of came off as him saying that, well, they're letting off steam. There's not really causing any issue. Just let them be. But the U.S. Army was like, okay, this is causing some alarm here. The second critical thing that occurred was that while the 364th was stationed at their camp, the Western Defense Command felt that it was necessary to say, well, maybe these black soldiers are having these issues because they're dealing with white military policemen. So maybe we should bring in a black military police battalion to police the 364th. Now, ironically, the soldiers in the 364th didn't take too kindly to that. And there's a multitude of reasons why they possibly didn't take too kindly to that. There's a possibility that well, as soldiers of the 364th, we should police ourselves or have our own military policemen take care of that rather than bringing in an entire battalion who really does not know us to police us. There was some equivalency in some of the soldiers' minds to those MPs possibly being the equivalent of a Sambo type deal. And if you're wondering what a Sambo is, you may have to look up in Uncle Tom's Cabin and see who the character really is. So you have these core events that are occurring and building up. But again, while the U.S. Army is kind of raising concern, some in the War Department are raising concern, and of course the Senator is raising concern, there was on a local level, it really wasn't felt that, okay, well, we're handling this issue. Yeah, there's some events here and there, but everything's pretty much under control. This all changes around Thanksgiving 1942. Now, around Thanksgiving 1942, the 364th, they conduct training, and after they finish their training, the commanding officer, as a gesture of goodwill and good faith after their completion of their training, says, well, they've been to town recently. They've been having hard conditions. Let me try to make it up for them by having them a hearty Thanksgiving meal, but also giving them a virtually unlimited supply of alcohol. And then in addition, also giving them passes to town, because prior to the exercises, they were not allowed to go into town. So it was kind of viewed as, well, these guys, they did a good job in their maneuvers. Let's let them go out and have some fun. Now, with the core of the event that starts, the Phoenix Massacre in itself, the direct trigger of the Phoenix Massacre can be traced to an incident that occurred in Phoenix. Now, in a cafe in Phoenix, there was a group of soldiers from the 364th, and one of the soldiers, according to Army records, they try to say that he was allegedly intoxicated, but we may never know. The soldier got into an argument with his female companion. The argument leads to a complaint where military policemen the black military policemen from the 333rd Military Police Battalion were called in to address the issue. The MPs come in, they address the issue, and they come in, they basically arrest the guy, and they apprehend him. Now, by this point, soldiers from the 364th start crowding around the MP during the time when he's apprehending the soldier. And there really isn't any explanation as to what was going on. So, like, some will just say, well, oh, the soldier just kind of crowding around just to observe. But some will say that, well, they were crowding around with kind of a view of disgust towards the MP. Now, so according to records, in order to disperse the crowd, the MP discharges 2 shots. First, he takes his pistol shoots in the air, and then he takes it and shoots it at the ground. The shot that hits the ground ricochets and hit one of the soldiers from the 364th Infantry. Now, again, that's according to the U.S. Army records that said, well, he discharged 2 shots, one in the air and one in the ground. Other records will say that the MP discharged his weapon in the crowd. So there's 2 possible stories as to the incident led to a soldier getting shot. Now, by this point, the soldier is wounded, but he's not killed. But by this point, local sheriffs come in, they disperse the crowd, they disperse everybody. Word gets back to the post, to the camp, that, man, these soldiers from the MPs from the 333rd, they killed our boy. They shot our boy. So rumors of the incident get back to camp, and because of the rumors, the soldiers in the 364th are saying, you know what, we had enough. Grab the rifles, we're marching into town. So soldiers from the 364th, they grab rifles, they march into town, and they ended up getting skirmishes with both local sheriffs and MPs. Now, accounts on the incident, on what occurred, are conflicting at best, but ultimately around 14 people are shot, and of the 14 that are shot, there's about 2 or 3 that are killed. So ultimately, after that event occurs, the War Department sends in some people to investigate. Among the people they sent to investigate was Benjamin O. Davis Sr., who at the time was the highest ranking black officer in the U.S. military, as well as a colonel named Joel R. Birney to investigate. They basically investigate and ultimately to figure out what led to it and what needs to be done. So after their investigation, they pretty much list out the following core issues for the cause of it. They cite a lack of discipline and poor morale. They make mention of the lack of adequate facilities, clothing, gear, and ultimately the poor living conditions of the soldiers. They also cite failure of leadership as one of the core issues. And last but not least, exaggerated rumors regarding the incident that triggered the event. Now, they recommended that there should be a push in corrective actions, and more specifically that the soldiers who were considered ringleaders should be punished, and that the Army should go ahead and take corrective actions to address the core causes that led to the Phoenix Massacre. Now, the U.S. Army by that point was starting to do corrective efforts to address the leadership, as I mentioned before. Now, the commanding officer of the unit, which was then Colonel Wickham, he was replaced by Colonel Goodman roughly around the time the investigation was going on, and Colonel Goodman set about addressing the issues of poor facilities, training, and equipment. Now, in terms of the punishment of the soldiers, 15 soldiers were tried by court-martial for mutiny and inciting a riot, and 14 of them were sentenced to various terms ranging up towards 50 years in prison. And one of the soldiers, Private Joseph Sipp, was actually sentenced to death. However, after his file was personally reviewed by Franklin Roosevelt, the cases and the charges were set aside. And quietly, as the investigations continued, they quietly dropped the other convictions as well, or quietly set aside the charges and returned the soldiers to duties in other units. Now, you may wonder, okay, well, given the fact that 14 people were shot and 2 soldiers and a civilian was killed, why would they set aside the convictions? Part of the reason was because during the skirmishes that occurred, nobody could really verify who shot first. Even though you had soldiers from the 364th that marched in with weapons, you also had sheriffs that had weapons, MPs that had weapons. And in some accounts, you even hear accounts of civilians having weapons in some cases. So while that is brought up, there's really no clear picture of, well, did the soldiers from the 364th shoot first, or was it the MPs and the sheriffs that shot first? And because it was really no clear connection as to who did what and who started what in these areas, that led to them quietly dropping some of the charges. Now, the interesting thing about this event is that this event is pretty much the start of when the 364th becomes marked as a troubled unit. Now, in the next video, I'll be covering the 364th while they were stationed at Camp Van Dorn in 1943. And in addition to that, I'll also be delving into the alleged Phoenix Massacre and providing my explanation of both what happened as well as the theories behind the not the Phoenix Massacre, but the Camp Van Dorn Massacre. So when I would start on that video, I'm going to also provide the sources as well as the information that kind of helped lead to my conclusions about my theory behind the alleged I keep saying Phoenix Massacre, but the alleged Camp Van Dorn Massacre. Now, also because of just how much information is coming out of just doing this research, I was supposed to do 2 more videos. In addition to the general history video of the 364th, I was supposed to do the video on the Phoenix Massacre and the video on the Camp Van Dorn incidences, as well as the alleged Camp Van Dorn Massacre. However, I'm going to have to add another video to that, and that video is going to focus on the investigation of the Camp Van Dorn incidences. And the reason why I have to add that in there, because in my research, I actually found some very interesting things that y'all may be very interested in to see regarding how the U.S. Army monitored the black soldiers. And for some that's watching, you'll see like the way that the U.S. Army monitored the soldiers will sound very familiar to some of the ways that other black groups will be monitored in the future. But with all that said, I want to take time to thank y'all for watching this video, and I hope y'all were able to take away something new from this video. So, thank y'all. Have a good night.